Good afternoon, everyone. Allow me to extend my appreciations for the invite to come back to ASEAS. It's been a while since regularly participating on this event. If I'm not mistaken, last time was 2012, and then after you serve in government, then you're so busy with government work, and sometimes you just get away from academia. So it's good to be back in this forum. Thank you for the invite, and I've been invited to speak about Indonesia's status after our reform in 1998. So next May, in May 2023, it'll be our 25th anniversary of our reforms into democracy after a new order in power for 32 years. So it's good for us to take a look where we are in terms of that. And I think Yeni's presentations earlier give us pictures where policy now matters, where issues are matters, but also there is these questions about, is our democratic consolidation continue, or we may be facing an interesting phase of our democratizations. It was discussions about the extensions of terms for the president. It was one of a subject that highly discussed in Indonesia in the past few months. So on these occasions, before I go on the details of that, allow me to underline a few things that makes our democracy today is actually much stronger than what one would have expected. One, yes, our reform is in 98, but the work for democracy started way before 98. Long before that. Number one, if you look at democracy, what does it mean? It means a process in which you create situations where political process allowing equal opportunities for ideas, for institutions, for political groups to compete in a fair way and to allow freedom of expression, to allow freedom of political aspirations, and that's key for democracy. And for Indonesia, the beginning of that is not in 98, but in 28, when we agree to have one common language, that is Bahasa Indonesia. It may look simple, but it is a unifying factors that glue Indonesia together until where we are today. This is a very diverse nation. More than 400 spoken languages, more than 400 ethnic groups. Imagine if we have democracy and we have no common language. Okay? So the foundations was clearly made long ago. And the language that was chosen was not the language of the majority, but the language of a minority, the Malay language. And we adopted that, and it becomes glue that make our nations as united as it is today. So now, when you have the House having meetings, the Senates, the government meetings, there is no interpreters in the back of the room. Everyone speak one common language. That's one. Number two, which is also important, is the abolishment of aristocracy or feudalism. When we had our independence in 1945, there was no less than 120 sultanates, local kingdoms across the archipelago. And we decided to respect that as cultural heritage, not as a political entity. And it has created a sense of equality. With that, we are able to see someone, son of nobody, daughter of nobody, elected into higher office, even the highest office. And the perfect example is Pak Jokowi. He was regular, coming up, born, raised in a common family, a regular family in Java, grew up and become president. That equal opportunity was there because of that reason, number two. Number three, for the past, under New Order, we are able to see civil society that is vibrant. Yeni's fathers, almarhum Pak Gus Dur, one of the key, most prominent civil society leaders then that gathered all civil societies activists as promoter of democracy, and these groups have been the one that prepared themselves for post-authoritarian regime. So that's number 3. Number 4, we had 6 elections under New Order, and it was a kabuki because we don't have to have a survey. We know who's going to win. We know who's going to lose. We know that Golkar will be number 1. We know that PPP is going to be number 2, and we know PDI at that time was going to be the 3rd. But 6 times of election every 5 years. What does it mean? It is training of electoral process for the entire populations. Imagine you have 500,000 polling stations. If it is a new democracy, had no trainings for electoral process, we may be facing problems like those in Africa, like in Latin America, like in Eastern Europe, because they had no trainings. The population had no trainings of what is elections and how you organize elections. The Arab Spring is the same thing. You have an authoritarian regime, but you had no electoral process. Yes, it was kabuki, but it was a good trainings. So when we had our reform in 98, the foundation was there. And then it comes freedom. In the past, you have elections, but only 3 parties can compete. After the reform, then we have so many political parties. New political parties was just mushrooming. And yet, what we are seeing is we're able to see elections the way it used to be. People used to come to election station, vote, you go home, you watch for the result on TV, and accepted the result. So that foundation is important to be taken into account when we are seeing today signs of regressions of democracy. I remember when I was in schools, whenever people talk about democracy, what makes democracy consolidated? And one of the key factors, when we're in schools, we're told that the losing party is willing to accept the result. If the losing party is willing to accept the result, then democracy consolidates. From our experience in Indonesia, I think we need to add another conditions. One is that. Number 2, the winning party is willing to leave office. Because if you, on the one hand, the losing party is willing to accept the result, but then the winning parties doesn't want to leave office, they will work on rules and regulations to extend their authority. And I think we need to have both. And Indonesia definitely need to have these 2 now. On the one aspect, we have proven to be good. After the reform in 98, starting in 2005, 7 years later, we have direct local elections for governor, for city mayors, for region. And elections were everywhere. And challenge to election result is massive. If we have more than 520 local elections, more than 300 local elections were contested in the courts, in the Constitutional Court. More than 300 local elections. But what's unique is this, and I see this as a sign of solid democracy. They went to the court, challenged the result, and when the judge decided, they went home happily or unhappily, but accepted the decisions of the court. They're not going to the streets and protesting endlessly. And that is signs where the foundations of democracy is there. So accepting the result. Now, the challenge that we are facing now is, are we able to see and are we able to sort of control those in power willing to end his authority as our constitutions and as our rules of democracy has outlined. And I think that's the challenge of today. And, conversations about extension and third term in itself was something that was unthinkable a few years ago. Never anyone would have discussed whether or not we will have that term, because the main reason why we have reform in 98 is, the one reason is to end multiple terms of presidency into 2 terms. That was the core message of our reform 98. So in the past few months, where we are seeing this issue, it is a sign that belief in democracy is decreasing among the ruling elites, but not among the elites of Indonesia and not among the people of Indonesia. So don't conclude this conversation as signs that the elites of Indonesia, the leadership of Indonesia is willing. However, minimum conversation on this. Minimum conversation. You are not seeing political party expressing their view on these issues. You're not seeing top leaderships clearly expressing a view on this. And I see this as sign of democracy that is not good. When you are having systems in the world of democracy and non-democracy, you see the pillars of these two. In a non-democracy, the pillars is fear. If fear is deteriorating, then authoritarian regime will fall apart. In a democracy, the pillars is trust. If trust is deteriorating, then democracy is declining. But what we are often seeing in the case of Indonesia in the past few years is we started to see emergence of fears, expressions of view on the issue of democracy have declined significantly. However, I have to put a note on that. During our meetings today, the PDIP is having its anniversary today. And on this anniversary, I was just checking as we were listening to the sessions, that Ibu Megawati made a statement this very day that 2 period is 2 period. Period. Okay? 2 periode adalah 2 period. Megawati has shown her quality, Ibu Megawati has shown her quality as guardian of institutionalizing our democracy, guardian of our democratic consolidations. She was part of the oppositions during the new regime, and when Indonesia experienced a reform, she became an important player in our political landscape. In fact, she's the longest serving political party leader, yet when she ran for election, she is willing to accept result when she lost the elections. And when she is in power, like today, she is perhaps one of the strongest political leaders. She is willing to accept the fact that there is a term limit in a democracy. Those 2 issues that I raised earlier was expressed and clearly set as an example by Ibu Megawati. So what I think going forward, yes, we may be seeing some degree of decline in terms of the quality of a democracy. That the laws that Ibu Yeni presented earlier have shown minimal public engagement in the formulations of the law. Some important policies have minimum public engagement, minimum democratic engagement. For example, the establishment of a new capital in East Kalimantan. Very minimum political process, very minimum public engagement. It shows some of the sign where democracy is not truly practiced. However, I must underline, we have vibrant civil society, we have freedom of expression in the media, and we have very active social media who will serve as guardian of our democracy. So I'm saying here that yes, there is sign of decline, there is sign of deteriorations, But you know, we have stronger foundations for that. And when the time is needed, they will speak up. I don't think the time is there yet. And what we are seeing, the statement made by Ibu Megawati today, I think will change the course of that conversations. I think by next week, that conversation would have ended. Now, I think starting from today. So I can say that 25 years after a reform, the principle of democracy is there, consolidation is there. However, reform in 98 is not only about electoral process, it's not only about presidential elections. There are other key issues, and those other issues, we are not there yet. Corruption eradications, that is still one of the biggest issues. The supremacy of law, that is still one of the biggest challenges in Indonesia. So there are agenda in which we have to address. But on and all, I would say that we are on the right directions in terms of consolidations. There is some aspirations to shift the gear toward more non-democratic, but we know it's not going to go anywhere. So our democracy hopefully will continue to consolidate. Thank you.